I didn't know anything about BC High School. This was my mother's dream, not mine.
When I told my mother I wanted to go to Matt Young High School, it was down the street, I could walk there, and she said, no, you're going to BC High.
And my father said to me, well, you're not going to the William Barton Rogers next year. And I said, I'm not. He said, no, Uncle Bill said that you're going to BC High. And I truly didn't even know what a BC High was.
So I went into Boston. The first person I ever met was Father Blatcher. He was just the most wonderful priest, wonderful person. That convinced me this is where I wanted to go to school.
I came at her again. I said, no, Ma, you don't understand. It's right down there. I can walk there. And she said, you're going to BC High. And I said, why? And she said, because I know that BC High will be an extension of my home.
I knew that I was home. I felt extremely comfortable at BC High almost from day one.
My mother was convinced that I was going to St. Sebastian's. And when I left my home that morning, my father knew otherwise and drove me to Mass Avenue and did not break the news to my mother until the end of the day. Her reasoning being that she saw that wonderful academic site on Massachusetts Avenue and decided that's no place for my son.
Our freshman year was held in a 6-decker on Massachusetts Avenue.
We were actually in these homes that had rooms, and the classes were in these homes.
Best thing to me was upstairs on the 4th floor, because it came like this, this, and this, and this. Those were levels. The teachers down here, we're up here eating our lunch, he couldn't see us.
As an indicator of the condition of that building, is Father McCarthy in our first algebra class. He's trying to teach us some algebra, but there was competition from the trucks and the buses out on Mass Ave. It was a hot day and the windows were open, so he went over and he pulled the window down and the whole thing fell out on the sidewalk.
And that was truly a step up, to say the least, when we moved from St. James Avenue to Morrissey Boulevard.
It was quite a chore to get into BC High.
When I came to BC High, I was living in Hyde Park, and it was rather an adventure.
From Brighton, whether it was to the north end or the south end, I should say, or over to the mudflats, it was certainly close to an hour each day. And when we played ball out at Franklin Field, that was even a longer trip for me. I remember getting home from football practice at 7 at night.
The best way, though, was to take the streetcar. The streetcar then changed to the subway, which then changed to walking.
In my case, it was, I don't know, 20 miles of about 14 different car rides, and you wind up shoveling through 2 feet of snow. If I tell that to my kids, come on, Dad, we can't believe that.
It was a frozen tundra, and it seemed in the winter that the wind would start somewhere out in the middle of the Atlantic and would be accelerating until it hit my face walking down what was then Old Colony Boulevard.
And they never called a day off.
And there was
Ever.
no buildings.
Rain, snow,
No
sleet.
buildings except us out here.
It was a wake-up call. Once you got here, the blood was flowing, and it was time to go to work.
My first teacher was Father Dave Leo, who was the first Jesuit that I really knew intimately. My uncles, of course, and my cousins, and I knew them in a little bit different way. Father Leo now was not only my teacher, but he was my mentor.
I knew what sin was after Father Leo, I tell you. And I knew what forgiveness was after Father King.
I think probably Father King was my favorite teacher. He was a lot of
English,
enthusiasm, nice guy. He identified with the students quite well.
Father Charles McCoy was an inspiration and certainly an outstanding coach and person.
Charlie McCoy was my coach, and he was a great role model for me.
He coached us, he taught us, he christened some of our children, he christened some of our grandchildren, and he buried our loved ones.
John was...
That's Charlie McCoy.
There were a lot of comical moments at BC High. One kind of strange, memorable moment was graduation. I graduated at about 300 pounds, and I remember we looked all over for a pair of pants to fit me. And we finally got a pair of pants with a size 52 waist, but we couldn't get a belt that big. So when I graduated from the stage of the Opera House, I had my arms tucked in so the pants wouldn't fall down.
Years ago, they used to have a big raffle. Father McCarthy would give away cars and everything else, and everybody in the school had to sell chance books. Well, they'd bring them in and bring them into school because there's 12 tickets stapled. Well, the good Francis Irwin, who is now Bishop, and Joe Hogan, who wound up as superintendent of schools in Connecticut, and myself, we got judged for something over there. And Father Dooley said, come on, you're going upstairs. We went up to the 4th floor, gave us 2 boxes about this big, said, separate them from them. So we started. And finally, we're out about, almost finished the 1 box. It was like 4:15. So somebody looked out the window and said, ooh, is it windy? Joe Hogan says, don't worry. He opened up the thing, threw the other box out the window.
Really? Wow.
Joe, we were talking earlier about the best day you had at BC High. Shall we tell them your very best day?
The very best day I had at BC High was graduation day.
What a relief! No, it's terrific.
But I must say, after having spent 37 years in the Marine Corps and looking back on that, that it was an easy transition from BC High to the Marines.
There's an interesting story about another priest, and one of my favorites, I think, Father Sheridan, who was formerly known as Mon Père. He was the French teacher, and he also had some hearing difficulties. And we would have monthly confessions at the Immaculate Conception Church, and they would have 6, 7, or 8 confessionals going for the entire school. And there may be 200 or so kids there at confession. 150 would be lined up at Montpère's box, and the other 50 would be spread amongst the other 6, because Montpère couldn't hear what you were saying, and would kind of judge by the tenor of your voice whether you really had some serious problems that he should address.
Some years after I graduated, my dad was at some sort of a reception, and Father Lyons, who was the Dean of Discipline during our time, as all our classmates know, was present. And my dad went and introduced himself, and Father Lyons thought for a moment. Joe Hoare, he thought. He waited a while, looked out the window, then finally came back and said, he was a good guy, but he hung out with a bad crowd.
I think from the day I entered BC High until the day I got out, anytime I talked to Billy, it was about James Michael Curley. And so I said, Billy, you gotta give your James Michael Curley speech in the cafeteria. And sure enough, he gets up on the cafeteria table. And 2, he can mimic that mayor like he was unbelievable, like he was his own flesh and blood.
I have many friends that didn't go to BC High that I grew up with. And sadly, they have no relationship with the kids, the guys that they went to high school with. We that went to BC High, and I know the class of '52 is unique in a lot of ways. We've stayed very close. But we get together as a group, and it's almost like being back in 1948 to '52.
Now, it's a special place with special people. You look at the class of '52 and the camaraderie, the spirit among all of us. You look at what we're there for each other.
I was the youngest, so all my siblings were gone to World War II. So these kids were my family.
The circle of friends that were on that ball team are good friends to this day, and We got to know one another well riding back from Franklin Field on the streetcar and laughing and kidding in the locker room. And many of us, of course, have stayed together and continued to be in touch all these years.
It's just wonderful to be a part of such a wonderful institution. People often ask me, they say, "Oh, what's your education?" I said, I received a Jesuit education.
To me, it meant excellence, discipline, ever to excel. You know, my day back then and Joe's day, and certainly today, you know, if you want to be the best, you know, you went to BC High.
As kids, we experienced what the Jesuits call cura personalis, that personal care that they take for each and every one of their students. And we felt that as kids, and that was the great, great plus about BC.
As you go through life, the basis of everything really came from BC High.
I was formed at BC High, and I know, I'm sure there are some teachers that would shake their head in wonderment at BC High. And first of all, that I turned out, that I'm still alive, and that I turned out relatively good.
Pride, I'm really proud of the fact I'm a BC High guy.
Being a member of the BC High community, being a graduate of BC High, and especially being a member of the class of '52 is a great honor.